Podcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everyone to today's webinar. We'll begin here in approximately 1 minute. Welcome to DRJ's webinar series, brought to you today by OnSolve. I'm Bob Arnold, President of Disaster Cover Journal. We thank you for joining us today, and we hope you gather some great information from today's webinar. Everyone's phone has been muted, and we ask you utilize the question panel you'll find on the right-hand side of your screen. Our speaker today will attempt to answer as many of these as possible at the end of the session. Again, today's sponsor is OnSolve, and today we'll be discussing how to reduce human error, tips to build, improve, and maintain employee awareness programs. Our speaker today is Cheryl Carmel. In her role as Vice President of Security, Cheryl is responsible for developing, maintaining, and continual improvement for the governance, risk management, compliance, security, and privacy programs at OnSolve. Ms. Carmel is a member of ISC Squared, where she holds her CISSP, among many other credentials. She participates in many industry events where she presents on key and current topics. And with no further introductions, I'd like to welcome and turn the mic over to Cheryl.
Well, let's see here. There we go. Hey, Bob, thank you very much for that introduction. I'm going to take a minute or so and do a little bit more information here about myself. If you've attended one of my other presentations, either with Bob or some of the other sessions that I've done, I do like to kind of give a little personal touch, a little personal background on different things that are there. And speaking of the other industry events and current topics there, I was just kind of reflecting this week. A year ago at this time, I was a happy new grandmother, so my granddaughter was just a couple of months old, but at this time I was sitting in a jury marshalling room waiting for my time to go through the voir dire process to be selected for jury duty and jury service there. And I actually was selected, and I ended up taking the month of April completely sequestered and listened to the case of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus Bill Cosby. So that was quite a unique experience that I will be speaking next week at a security conference on, talking about the security that went on with that and the privacy perspective of that kind of event. So it was a great civic duty that I was very proud of. And then going on to this year, we're waiting for our second grandchild. And I have a nephew that's returning home from the Army. So our appreciation to all of our troops and veterans, those people who really do a lot of service for the U.S. So let's jump on into the topics that we've got here. Today's topic on reducing the human error and errors, in my opinion, is the foundation to build upon against the war on cybercrime. So we'll go through these agenda topics of the importance of an awareness program, changing the culture and mindset of the individuals that are working in these environments, getting the reasons why we do the programs, understanding that, and it's not just for the compliance sake, and some of the pillars that we use to build the programs that are out there. So why is it important to build an awareness program? We know that cybercrime is booming business. It always has been, always will be, and individuals as well as businesses are the targets. Employees are causing many of the breaches by either accident or sometimes intentional. So these awareness programs are pretty important. And an information security white paper by Shred-it, the state of the industry is what it's called, as just from last year. They gathered information from both small business owners, SBOs, as well as large organizations that have the C-suites, which you'll see some of the statistics here in a second, across the United States and Canada predominantly, but they also included United Kingdom as well as Australia. The fact is that consumers are now paying more attention to the news. And since the news is filled with a lot of information on these breaches, they're watching that to see different things like where to get a job, if they want to go and keep a job or get a new job. They want to see these companies and where their breach status is. They will use the breach statuses to choose where they want to work at a rate of 81% in the US, and in Canada that rate would be around 79%. So some assumptions I built behind this is going into those numbers is that prior to a breach, the security processes at our companies, the management style may not care too much about the employees or the data. And then after a breach, the oversight from that company, possibly because of regulatory requirements or customer requirements, would be overbearing. Morale could possibly be pretty low in those kind of companies. For a security expert, on the other hand, if that company was choosing to do a better job at improving the security, there would be a lot of things that would entice me to want to go to work for something like that, just so that I can do a lot of the improvements that was coming along. How companies handle breaches in the media is quite important to its long-term success rate. You have to own it and fix it. Never try to sweep any kind of a breach or incident like that under the rug. And other consumer-based information that the decisions that consumers are making is anything from choosing a bank, choosing a hotel. We've seen a couple of those breaches recently, and even into something like choosing a car dealership. So 96, in this paper there, 96% of Americans and 94% of Canadians see employee negligence as a contributing factor to these type of breaches. And if a consumer feels that employee negligence is that high toward causing these breaches, how is that playing out in their workforce, in their day-to-day work life? What is leading to the feelings that customers are reporting, that these consumers are reporting rather, and the actions that are of the employees that result in these breaches? With half of the C-suites that C-level people that were interviewed for that survey stating that human errors or accidents have caused some kind of an incident that led to a breach, something is happening in the workforce there. And a few factors that came up in my research, including this white paper we're talking about, but other places as well, is talking about things like open concept offices and remote workers. So an open concept office are those offices that have few or no doors, few locked cabinets, drawers, things like this. Not many companies have considered the privacy screen on the different monitors that are around, and the desks are wide open. Everybody can see everything within the room. There's really no place to hold confidential phone calls. And a specific incident that happened to me recently, having a conference call with someone that was in one of those open concept offices, I could barely hear the person that was actually talking to that I was having a call with, but the background noises and the background conversations I could hear pretty clearly. And there's obviously a lot of information there that I probably should not have heard. So it's something to be aware of, and the type of information leakage that's going on there. Another group of those factors that we're looking at are the remote workers and at-home workers, and I'll distinguish those a little bit throughout, is since more and more of the workforce is on the road and traveling as part of their job, that means they're working from hotel rooms, hotel lobbies, hotel bars, something like this. And I did have an experience here recently in San Diego where I was there at the hotel bar, and there was a full-blown business meeting going on there at the bar, the restaurant area of the hotel. And while I sit with my back to the wall so I can shield my screen, these folks were, in a couple of different tables in the middle of the floor, and they were preparing for a meeting the next day. And they were sharing information about different companies that they were doing business with, about project names, about the defects and percentages of defects, names of staff, all kind of things like this that really should not have been discussed in an open forum that way. Change that to an employee that works from a home office. They may not have the same level of controls on their home internet and their processes there, Wi-Fi, whatever, that they would have in an office environment. So if they're sharing a Wi-Fi and the internet with their significant other or somebody else working from home, or their children, and then their children bringing over friends, so you get the picture there. There could be a lot of different risks associated with that. And both Canada and the US have close to 90% of the larger businesses and around 50% of smaller businesses either permitting or requiring workers to work in a remote setting. This is a demographic that really needs to be focused on for security controls. So some key points out of this, with the C-suites feeling like, I think it's 82% and 86% of these workers of the C-suite side, the larger companies, being at greater risk of causing a breach, and around 60%, 60 and 63% of the small business offices feel the same. So employees are really not being trained or made aware of how to conduct safe business practices outside of the office environment, and even in some of those office environments like we talked about with the open concept. And many companies, I think the number was 34% of small business offices, don't have policies that specifically cover these type of workers, the remote workers and things. Larger organizations had more of the policies, but only 78% of those larger organizations reported that they were actually training on those policies on an annual basis. All of the organizations that we surveyed or that were surveyed for this white paper see these trends of the open concept and remote working growing over the next 5 years, and all feel that employee negligence is a contributing factor to breaches, so that will continue to grow. So how do we change these facts? Well, those same consumers are also employees, so we have to really look at this loop of the cycle. So we need to ensure that the employees know the facts and know how to act so that we can get the consumer side of their brain to trust again. So all good programs that we're talking about, this awareness program, start with some kind of a goal. The overarching goal of awareness training is to have and cultivate a culture that does the right thing for security and for the right reasons. While company compliance to laws and standards are a must, that's a requirement, the bigger goal is to instill that underlying desire from each individual to do the right thing to ensure security and privacy. And that is thought about for all the actions that they do, regardless if that person is sitting in an office environment built like Fort Knox, or if they're sunning themselves by a pool or at a resort beach someplace. A purely technical security-focused goal would be to secure an asset, and that's something, and an objective thing would be like enforcing antivirus software on all your workstations, having regular updates to that software, running scans at a defined cadence, things like this, not permitting that employee to make any changes to all those settings that you have there, those good technical settings. Those would be supporting set of actions for the human, but the focus really needs to be back on the human, and we'll be talking about that several different times there. Some objectives to get the human-focused secure culture is to change the behavior of individuals to be more focused and aware of the actions that could lead to an incident, which could eventually lead to a breach. Again, that business meeting that was in the middle of the hotel, gosh only knows what they had there, and if they were connected to the internet, how secure were they? Those are the type of things we need people to think about when they are sitting in different locations. Ensuring all employees are well aware of the policies, know where to go to find them, and where or who to go to for advice for the correct actions on how to implement those policies. And as much as possible, take that decision away from the employee and enforce those technical and physical controls. That helps to enhance the human's efforts that's there. Okay, so a little bit on the learning framework. Most companies do have someone that's responsible for different employee education, maybe at the HR level, and some of the companies I've seen come up with a new learning person that's specifically for the security awareness training, so it's getting to be a pretty big business there. Either type of learning, either HR or security focused, have the same challenge in getting the message out to everyone, and the same challenges for getting the time on everybody's training calendar that's there. We are competing with things like sexual harassment prevention, anti-bribery, anti-corruption, fraud prevention, as well as having the security and privacy training that we need. Learning management teams usually get like that one slice of time every year, the annualized training that's required. It's just simply not adequate to cover all the info needed and provide the reminders on a regular basis. And while security is the product here, that must be sold to our executives to make sure that we can get the time needed. We know we have a compliance level on that too, but we need to make sure that the individuals want to participate and pay attention. Because they could be getting out here and just turning it on, letting it go while they go do something different and just keep listening or keeping the webinar or whatever going on there. So some of the general learning framework starts with the awareness. This is where the learner receives information, just plain receives the information. It comes from different directions. We hit the employees from different angles, all in trying to get the message to stick one way or the other. A few years ago, I was talking to an employee that was just doing some tailgating, and they said they didn't realize that they weren't supposed to let somebody in the building with a badge, but they were standing in the lobby underneath a poster really that had that same message of don't do this. So the different techniques to get the message out is part of it. Maybe they didn't pay attention to that poster, they just thought it was a pretty picture, so something that way. So there's different avenues that you can use to attack that problem. Bulletin boards that are either TV monitors or just plain bulletin boards, the old cork boards there that could be in the lobby, could be in your break room next to the coffee pot, next to the water cooler, things like that. Get those messages out that way. Posters and banners, placed in different spots around the office. Again, you put one next to the exit so that somebody would maybe pay attention to it when they were entering or leaving the building. Newsletters, flyers, some form of regular communication that provides different tidbits of information. And sometimes if you have that where you can share that with family or friends, that would give a little bit more of a onus of the person to start paying attention and say, hey, if I do this at home with my friends, my family, my children, then possibly I should be doing that at work as well. Something that would be pretty big and pretty amazing to be able to do is a company-wide security focus conference. Having different security team members presenting information about their jobs and how that reflects across the company and into the other employees, how their work life works. If you have budget that you can buy stuff to give it away, pens, Post-it notes, some kind of direct message about how to stay safe online, that would be a pretty cool thing. And if you had something that was pretty bigger, something to work to win, some kind of a contest, a laptop bag, for example, that has a cable lock in it for some physical security type of stuff. Anytime you can have a presence on your corporate internet or portal there, or any kind of internal social platform like Skype or Slack or Channel, these are all things we can do for awareness, just getting the message out on a constant basis that doesn't take too much time away from them, but still provides you a platform of sharing that message. They're all passive ways to get that message out. The next tier that we see, the training part, this requires active participation in some kind of an event. We're teaching to a goal and learning objective, which are designed to change the behavior of the learner. Finding ways to fit in smaller chunks, like a 15-minute segment a couple of times over a course of a few weeks. You still need to do the longer sessions that would provide places and methods for the employee to practice so that they can try a few things out, especially if you've got some documentation on steps they're supposed to follow. Give them the learning opportunity to get and practice this to make sure that they really can build in the skills that they definitely need. And by building that training program with those functional exercises and integrating the skills and the knowledge and competencies, that will lead to the next layer of the education. And this is where the information is now in the individual's common body of knowledge, something that's more natural for them, something that they would be able to do when that incident does occur. One second. Designing any kind of a training program means that you need to know who your audience is, who you'll be talking to, and how you're going to be addressing them for the different topics that you've got. So addressing a sales team, for example, the same as you do a system administrator, is not going to get the best results that you're looking for. So understand those teams, sales, marketing, client support, technologist, and the work environment that they have. Are they working in an office? Are they working at home? Are they traveling? You just need to be able to make sure that you understand. There's a cultural element as well to this whole process, and we'll get into culture in a couple slides here, but it's possible to design and deliver the same basic message to the different audiences using different techniques. It takes time to isolate it that way and focus and target your audience, but the message will be better accepted and better understood by those employees. Learning goals and objectives will lay out the behavior changes that you want to instill. Spending a lot of time on something like don't tailgate to a remote workforce may seem like a waste of time to them. They certainly need to know about these processes there because they could potentially need to go into the office someday, and they'll need to know that even though they're an employee, if they don't have a badge for that building, they'll need to be escorted as a visitor. Conversely, if you have an employee that has secure clearance to server rooms, for example, or to the data centers, they may be very well aware of the no tailgating policy, that they're not permitted to let somebody into the front door just because they know the person, and perhaps that person says, I forgot my badge today. They should know that they're not supposed to do that. But more importantly, that person with that security clearance to the server room must not permit anyone to tailgate in with them when they're going into that server room that they've got that clearance to. Identifying a set of set of number of behaviors that you need to focus on. Reasonable number there, 3 to 5 at a time is probably good. Be sure the learner gets these behaviors down before moving on to the next. So that's a building block to make sure that the individual employees learn what they need to learn before we get even more complicated information that they need to do. The delivery methods are sometimes dictated based upon the workforce itself. If 80%, give or take, of your workforce is remote, having in-person lecture-based training takes more planning and budget to get everyone in one spot at the same time. That's one of the advantages to sessions like this with DRJ and Bob, is having web sessions where you can present information. It's fairly live. We could do a webcam if we wanted to. We'll be exchanging questions in a little bit. So that adds a little bit more personalized information to these kind of sessions. Then there are pre-recorded, the old CBT type of modules that are easy to deliver at the leisure of the learner and gets that message out to the masses. So there's different types of ways to do this. And in my opinion, all modules need to have some method to confirm the person is engaged, taking a quick test of the objectives at various times. That'll ensure that there is some level of learning and that they're not just turning on the video and walking away and doing something else at the same time. The last of these strategies that we're talking about here includes metrics for success. A simple compliance metric is to make sure that X% of your employees are taking the training within X amount of time. Something like, let's go for 90% in 30 days and then have 100% complete that training within the 45 days from the start. But the more important metric is the behavioral change out of this. So anytime you deliver training and you get the message out there, you're going to expect possibly an uptick in the number of incidents that are being reported, because you're teaching people what an incident is, something that they didn't think of before. Now they're all of a sudden realizing that is an incident. And then possibly a decrease in the number of accidents. People are paying attention a little bit more. They've been hearing more and more about security, so they're paying more attention to things like that. So you'll need to look at your environment and design the metrics that work best for you out of that. Now into some information about cultures there. So part of my research recently has been listening to more and more podcasts myself. There's a group called Marmalade Box that has a security awareness training website. And their statement online is they cultivate, design, or leverage a security awareness culture by raising awareness and influencing behaviors. So there's a lot of good podcasts that they have with a variety of experts, not just in the learning and development or security awareness space, but they are seeking people in other industries such as risk management and change management, neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy. So quite a variety of people are on these. The research that I've been doing for OnSolve Security Awareness Training Program has focused on these cultural differences, and I found a good deal of common thinking and some very unique perspectives because of the people that they have on those. So starting at the bottom of this image that's here, what is culture in general? It's those attitudes, beliefs, and values that drive behavior in a defined group or a social circle. So that defined group can be as large as a nation. The U.S. attitudes are very different than maybe the people in China, for example. And even within the U.S., there's differences between people who live in California to Wyoming to Alabama to New Hampshire. You have all kinds of different cultures there that you can be building upon. There are a few learning theories that work within these cultures as well. One theory is stating that when given the same information, the individual will make the right decision, including making the same decision for different people. Decisions really are based upon that culture and many other human factors as well. So information such as how harmful smoking is to the body, we know that different people will make different choices just because they have that same information. So some people will smoke and they all continue smoking. Others smoke, they want to quit, but they find it hard. And other people are very strongly in an anti-smoking camp. So that's one topic that disproves the theory that given the same information, people will make that right decision, which is the same decision. Organizational cultures is the culture within an organization, such as a school, governmental agency, nonprofit, and other companies. So this is taking it from the major culture and getting down to one of the subcultures that we'll talk about here. And some examples I've read about and thought about on this one here is there are people who work in a park ranger industry, the park ranger industry there, that have a very different perspective from those working in, say, the logging industry. Other example is a financial institution is very different from organizations that are like cannabis dispensaries. So when I was trying to do a little bit of research on cannabis, on marijuana dispensaries, putting this training together, I was blocked by my company's web filtering systems there. So the technical controls are in place to prevent me from doing things like that. But you can bet in a cannabis-based business, that search would be permitted to occur. So these are just some of the cultural type of things that would be within an organization. So even within an organization, go into the other side of the chart, there are functional cultures, that subculture associated with the type of position someone has. So employees that are in customer-facing, either in a customer support or service role, sales and marketing role, see their world very different from someone in finance or legal or those other risk-averse type of positions. And all employees in technical roles see different than any one of those. I tend to worry most about our customer-facing roles. Their job is to be nice and helpful, and possibly clicking that link is something that they feel that they're supposed to do to help their customers out. I also worry about people in the development and deployment roles. Those jobs, based upon an agile SDLC methodology, is to push changes out as quickly as possible to get the information out for updates, new features, and things like that into production. Luckily, those type of people are counterbalanced by the people on the infrastructure teams whose job is to ensure the stable environment overall. So each of these different functional cultures have different ways to look at things, and how we address them is going to be very important. Then we have our cybersecurity culture, and I do live a very paranoid life that somebody's going to be out to get us at any time. Our job in cybersecurity is to take that knowledge that we have and translate it into the right messages for each of these cultures that we're looking at. And to redefine cybersecurity a little bit, not to be so paranoid, is I think it's the attitude, belief, and values that drive behaviors to create a more secure and safe environment for all employees within the organization. Another piece of research there by MIT Sloan included a survey about the importance of cybersecurity in a company strategy. So results showed on that one, 70% of organizations interviewed felt that cybersecurity is very important. Only 70%, I thought that was kind of low. Another unfortunate result of that survey is they felt that only 45% of the respondents felt that their employees had the skills and capabilities to follow cybersecurity rules. So that's a pretty low percentage there. And one more piece of information out of that one is that they were showing that cybersecurity teams have a difficult time working with the business units to improve security. And I had just this week one of those conversations where trying to implement some new things within the company, getting pushback from one of the organizations that we're dealing with, and we're just trying to see how we can make sure we're flexible enough to allow that functional group there to do what they need to do, but at the same time implying all the cybersecurity controls that we really need to do to make sure we're staying safe. So one way to put this into the employee's work life is to make sure cybersecurity of some way or another, or security awareness, is in a job description and in the annual performance review. By putting it there, it'll make people understand and pay attention to it a little bit more. Another area of the research for this culture-based information here, Dr. Shar Sample. This is someone I have watched her career for quite a few years. She's a prolific writer, researcher, and she's currently a research fellow for the ICF, for the Army Research Laboratory. And she was featured on one of those Marmalade Box podcasts, and that podcast series is called Rethinking the Human Factor. But her research into successful cyber victim exploitations is about culture here. So she states that cultural influences behavior and motivation for behaviors, and that cultures lead to successful exploitation of those certain cultures. So it's kind of a loop type of statement there, but her work is basically shaping the understanding that culture, the culture of individual victims. So what makes that person be more capable of being victimized? She's listed culture as an attack vector, and culture is a vulnerability. So a lot of good information that she's got there. She's also stated that all the technology in the world will not fix the problem, that you have to take that culture into the equation, or you're going to be settling for some kind of a partial success for whatever you're trying to do. So kind of changing that part of the theory is that security awareness training by itself does not necessarily result in behavior change, and that technology is needed to assist it there. So one thought with that one is we've been teaching, these things about don't click on that link, make sure you have strong passwords. Those things have been talked about for 20 plus years, and it still hasn't done a complete effect. But I keep thinking, what if we hadn't done any training at all? How much more would be going on? So we kind of go back and forth between making sure we're securing the human and making sure we're using our technical and physical controls to make all of this work together. You can build a security process using tight administrative policies, technical policies, physical policies, but if a person can't do their job, they will need to MacGyver their way out to do what they need to do. So those are some of the people that we need to really think about and get them, lead them to understand the challenges that we're trying to do, and maybe they can help us get where we need to do. Changing that underlying culture will change the mindset to be more security focused, which will ultimately lead to the complete success we're looking for. Okay. So who requires all this work? We've talked about the human parts of this. We've talked about all the human side, some of the technology side. Now, what is mandated and what is not? These are some of the things that can help us reshape and update our programs that we have. Regulations we know are required by law. Standards are not. So standards are more industry specific. It's things that more companies require, but it's not a legal requirement that's there. And they're adhered to for best practices by many firms. And complying either way, either law or standard here, is a good strategy when the bad thing does happen. Having a certification to one of these standards is a good strategy if you do get hit, and then whenever you're showing to insurance companies, your customers or whatever, it can help prevent too much of a financial or reputational loss for you. And as we'll see here, security awareness training, it's specifically defined as a requirement in all of the regulations that are there. So it's called out somehow or another, with the exception there of Sarbanes-Oxley and Gramm-Leach-Bliley. It's in there, but there's an indirect reference. So it doesn't say you have to do this, but it implies throughout that you do have to. The role-based training is a requirement specifically called out in the ISO standards as well as the NIST standards. And then PCI adds in there at onboard of new employees that you have to deliver training. And then with HIPAA, that comes into the regular updates. So all of these have some kind of a level that, you need some kind of a training that's out there. Interesting with NIST is out of the controls that they have, and whatever, 325, I think, total controls, and then there's sub-controls under that. There's 11 specific controls relating to security culture and security training in NIST. So something else to be aware of there. So what do we need to build to make all this happen? We've discussed the human and the required side. Now let's talk about that program, how we can turn some of these things into the program that we need. So we need to implement a well-rounded program to make a net effect on the culture of the organization. So starting with the fun stuff, let's decide what the organizational culture needs by coming up with some kind of a creative motto. Something that would be fun and everybody can say, we've heard this, see something, say something type of thing. Those are the simple things that bring something to mind as soon as you hear that. Having a mission statement, vision, or future state of what you're looking to get to there is good. What is the outcomes of the program, usually those behavior changes you're looking for, and setting the full goals and objectives for everything that you've got. If the organization has a learning management system, sometimes this is HR, sometimes this is in your training team, depending upon how your organization is set up. If you're fortunate enough to have an organization that has a security awareness training role specifically, that makes it even better. But regardless of where that function sits or how the information will be delivered, will dictate who does the delivery on that. So if everything is set up through the standard web delivery, an email generally from that learning management system is all that's needed. Let's, get it out there, get it started, and then employees will know that's there. And that's one of the interesting things is you're trying to teach them not to click on links, and you send them these learning management things and have them click on a link. So it's making sure they have the right information and know what they're supposed to do. If the training will be delivered in person, then you've got more logistics needed to cover everything there to get the people in the right spot, reserve the rooms that are large enough, making sure you've got all the technical things that you need to make it happen. Security is a job of all employees. They need to recognize the threats that they're faced with each day and understand the value of the security policies to respond to those threats. So all staff will need a standard set of training. And again, you can look at how to deliver that to the different groups to make it more specific. Then specific roles within the organization need targeted training. Specialized roles have specialized requirement, from things like managing privileged access to those customer-facing roles, and then accounting finance individuals. These guys are prime targets for the wire transfer fraud attacks. So you want to make sure you're getting the right type of information in the right hands. So events need to be coordinated throughout the organization. The standard training must include all company policies. That is specifically called out as well in the ISO and the NIST standards. Employees need to be very well aware of the actions that they are required to do, including reporting events and ensuring its escalation to management. There's going to be a couple types of reporting that we're talking about here. One of them is reporting that an event has occurred, and then reporting to auditors, management, things like that. So got all this stuff got together there. You have the LMS system, its ability to monitor and track who took the training, provide the reports on any training and any training curriculum that you've built. All these metrics and reporting are crucial for those standards. The auditors will be asking for the evidence that the training has occurred and followed up on to make sure that the people have taken that. An interesting piece of information that I've been able to use in my lecture-based training is to let people know that during those audits, you don't want to be the one person that didn't take the training, and then that's going to be found on the audit. Not that that employee's name specifically will be put on the audit report, but still see in the audit report with that word, one employee failed to complete training. That's something that can be an intimidation factor. One other quick point is that any kind of cyber insurance companies, they're also starting to require some kind of a training report to let them know how you're doing to get the message out to all employees. Okay. So many ways to design a training plan, and these are just some of the suggestions that are there. I always start everything with a policy. If you've listened to me before, policy seems to be at executive management buy-in is another thing that's really important. But policies define what each employee is expected to do. So you need to have that out there so they know what's going on. Then you have a risk and threat assessment, let you know where the focus should be. Then you need to get a communication plan. How do you get that communication out to all employees for the different things? Perhaps use your notification tool for communication. If you don't have access to a distribution list, so making sure you're coordinating the emails that are going out. Intranet sites, if you have that, some organizations don't, but if you do, it would be a great place to post messages on a common website. Some organizations are in multiple locations, multiple buildings, making those bulletin boards we talked about earlier, not a good single place to do unless you're sending things to each one of the organizations that are there. So basically knowing where your, how your company is set up so you know how to communicate to get the message out to everyone. It may take multiple strategies to make all that happen. Keeping it relevant to your business and your employees. Like we mentioned earlier there, a financial organization and a cannabis organization may have some varied relevancy there, as well as their culture. So knowing all that before you get your training program started. Using your risk and threat assessments to determine the main threats that your users need to know about will drive that specific content that you've got. And the reporting, again, your users need to know when and how to report an incident. Tell them not to worry about over-reporting. It may annoy the help desk a little bit, but that one report that could signal a major breach is what you're working to avoid any way, shape, or form. So a little bit on the training policy. Policies, like I say, some people it brings fear to them, and other people it brings more comfort. They know what is expected of them. It's the written word stating the rules of engagement and the things that are permitted or not permitted. They provide guidance on everything from how to secure a building, securing an application, securing the human. Regulations and standards all reference different policies, including training policies, and the need for all employees to be trained and not only just train, but understand and sign off on the fact that they did this. And making sure you're tracking that as well is very important. So that written documentation is the details that the organization expects of each employee, so they really need to know this information. And training is key to that accomplishment. If employees are not aware that a policy even exists, or if they're not aware of where it sits, they can't follow it, they can't reference it, these simple facts need to be included in your training. They do require regular review for continued relevance, and as your needs change, those needs need to be documented and need to be signed off on by executive management. Threat and risk assessments, you can do a threat assessment on virtually anything, lists physical, technology, and human here. On your physical layer, what's your building like? Do you have bollards outside of the front of the building? Do you need them? Do you have a generator? If you do, what employees are responsible for those generators? What happens when they turn on? Everybody needs to know. The technology layer, review applications, review the infrastructure, make sure that people know what's going on in the production as well as on the corporate side. And these assessments really focus on why would somebody want that business's data. And as long as you understand that piece, then doing a risk assessment should be fairly easy for you. The employees that are involved in the scanning processes, these vulnerability scanning processes, need to know the importance of that and what to do with the scans that they're getting. Threat assessments can be done with the humans themselves, the human layer, the culture. There's different vocations that have more threats than others. And vocations, something like hospital workers, taxi drivers, that was interesting, law enforcement, those were all heavy threat areas. And unfortunately, some of the things that we've seen recently, being in the school professions, have just as many threats with some of the things that are going on. Using that threat and risk assessment-based information to build your security program and your awareness program to cater to the needs of all of those vocations, all the different organizations that are there, helps you determine the number of hours that need to be spent in setting up the training and the testing that's required, and the education of that learner and the culture change that we're seeking. So making sure you have all that together. Communications there. Providing regular communications is important. Again, we were saying earlier that you want to hit them from as many different directions as possible so that one of them sticks, but communication overload is a threat in and of itself. We receive so many emails, so many phone calls, so many text messages, it can all be very counterproductive. So thinking of other methods to communicate. Again, going back to the corporate website, it could be the landing page that everybody gets into the first thing in the morning, so those ominous zero-day threats could pop up there. Your notification tool can provide desktop pop-up that can be used for those type of immediate alerts. Maintaining a location such as a SharePoint site where these alerts can be reviewed at any time would also be helpful. Awareness training itself is a great communication tool. So if you get to use the lecture-based training, you get to deliver that personal touch of training. If you use the online computer-based training, you can usually pre-record something, provide some kind of a personal starting point as well. I'm totally an advocate of doing face-to-face training and live training as much as possible. It just needs to be delivered at the right cadence, at the right place, to the right audience at the right time, just to make sure that you've got everything taken care of. Keeping it relevant. The training program should be relevant to your business and your users. Mentioned that a couple of times here, and it should help them feel empowered rather than put upon. You don't want them feeling like the villain. Each industry's guidance for protection of data and the educational requirements for that data needs to be considered that's there. If the employees understand the type of data that they're responsible to protect, and if you're in a specific industry like financial or healthcare, there are very specific things that are there. And if the individual team member within any of these industries know what data that they're dealing with, perhaps, again, you're in a financial organization, but you're dealing specifically with HR data, so knowing what the relevancy is for the organization as well as the person. Regardless of the industry or function within the business, somebody needs to review the data elements to fully understand what each area needs to know. So some areas could have access to more information than they really need, and you need to make sure that you're looking at the relevance of that information that's there. It needs to be specific to the area the employee must protect, as well as a general training to ensure coverage of all areas that the data may come into contact with by accident or any other way that's there. Topics to consider in the training program that's there. Your threat assessment is going to help you with this, so make sure you're looking at that to understand all those factors that I talked about. And spam is usually the biggest thing that we hear and see about, because there's so much spam that's coming out in so many different ways, and nothing is sacred anymore. We've been dealing with regular email phishing, spear phishing, and whaling for many years. Vishing, which is phishing over voice over IP, and smishing, which is the phishing using our SMS text. All of these are coming up. And also spam in social media. Facebook, just because you Facebook or Twitter or whatever, if there's a link out there, that could be spam. You just never know. So make sure, again, your remote workers, they understand how to connect securely when they're at a hotel or Starbucks or wherever they're going to be, and understanding things, what data linkage means, and how privilege escalation can help or hurt them in a different direction. A little bit more on the reporting that's here. Employees must realize that a thing is a security thing to know that they need to report it. And they need to know who and how to report those incidences that are occurring. So from a salesperson's perspective, if they happen to send a contract to the wrong person, wrong customer, that would be an incident that they may not consider. I'll just, make sure that I get that contract back. And what if you have a trade show manager that loses their phone that happens to have company data or a bunch of contact information? Those are incidences that need to be reported. So since there's never a way to list all the possible incidences, you need to find examples that you can point out to those different groups that you're talking to. And once they understand a few of the examples, we would hope that they could use common sense to make sure that they're successful other ways. Having employees willing to speak up and not be afraid of telling on themselves or afraid of the consequences or retaliation by reporting someone else. These are really hard areas to think about there, because you don't want to say, oh my gosh, I made a big blunder here that's going to cost the company a lot. But it's better to come forward and say that so that things can be fixed quicker, rather than waiting too long and then having other things come up from it at a later time. And then again, if something is happening and an employee sees somebody else doing something, that employee that sees it really needs to understand where they can go report it, possibly even anonymously, to make sure that they feel more comfortable to do that. Regulations and standards all require reporting of training to make sure that you're getting 100% of the 100% of your employees through the training program, and making sure that you've got all this documented. So in summary and closing here, we know that humans are our weakest link overall. They cause breaches either on purpose or by accident, and these events, can be pretty devastating to a company. We know that our culture drives our actions, and that change the culture, you must train your humans, and this does take time to change the culture of an organization. We know that in addition to training our humans, we should implement technical and physical controls that provide assistance to those humans so that they can make the right choices, and it's almost like a no-brainer that they have to do. And we know that there's no perfect solution overall, only a bunch of good intentions, and we just need to keep trying and training and doing more and more we can. So with that, Bob, I'll throw it back to you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Cheryl. And if you do have any questions for Cheryl here today, you can locate the question panel you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll get to these as many as we can, and if we don't get to them, Cheryl and the OnSolve team will have access to the questions. We'll follow up with everyone after the webinar's ended. So first few questions here, referencing things you discussed in the presentation. What was the name of the podcast you had mentioned? Someone asked.
Sure. The podcast is Rethinking the Human Factor. Marmalade Box is the website to go to.
All right, wonderful. Next question is, what is the name of the awareness organization you referenced on slide 11?
Oh, I don't know. Which one did I do? Let's see. Okay, so that may be the same thing. So it was Marmalade Box was part of that, and Rethinking the Human Factor is a group that's there. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that I mentioned in that area that's there.
All right. If
So,
the individual
yep,
has any more information on the question, we can go back to that one if we have time.
okay,
Next question
yep.
here. If we
Oops.
were hacked today, what is the first thing we should do?
Okay, so if you're hacked today, the first thing, well, hopefully you'll go back and pull out your incident management and or crisis management plan and just start executing straight from there. This is one of those, talk about the security awareness training, is having a training specifically for your incident management plan and your crisis management plan is pretty important. So teaching to that, so those people who are in those technology roles know exactly what to do. How was it detected? You know, that's going to be the first thing. Did a customer detect it? Did one of your things detect it internally there, one of your monitoring tools? Did somebody else report something there? Find a way to respond to it, again, based upon the playbooks that you hopefully already have in place, making sure your communications folks, so that depending upon where this incident has occurred, you get the right message to your internal people and, if necessary, external people, including your lawyers and any of the information sharing groups. So things along those lines. But yeah, having an incident management plan, a crisis management plan is pretty critical if you get any kind of hacking activity that is popping up on your radar.
All right. Next question. What is the biggest cyber threat to businesses today?
The biggest cyber threat to businesses, I have to always kind of go back to the human factor, the human error. That's a lot of what we've been talking about today. There's all kind of things. The endpoint keeps moving, but that is all associated back to that human. So with the endpoint moving, as we mentioned, remote workers, the different open concept office environment, you know, people working at home, those are all ways that the endpoint just keeps moving out further and further away from the core of, and again, thinking back to the mainframe days, that core of the mainframe, and it just keeps spreading out. But until you get your human to understand the importance of all the threats that are associated with them, then we'll continue having more threats to the business environment that we're in.
All right. You mentioned the business continuity and the crisis management plans. What about a separate cyber response incident plan? Is that something that you see within the industry?
Absolutely. So again, dependent upon, and the way I look at it together is our business continuity management program is consistent of several things. So incident management, again, when we're talking about hacking earlier there's specific things that are going on within the hack. If it's something that's a cyber part of the event, then you have to deal with it from that direction. So needing cyber instructions in there. What if it is a breach? Do you have a breach response plan? So all of these build off of one, and different organizations will set it up differently. As long as you've got the points covered, that's the primary thing. And if you want to go back and look at both ISO and NIST, there's some good guidance in both of those to cover all of those.
All right. How often should we run employee cyber awareness campaigns?
So and again, thinking back to awareness, training, and education, the learning fundamentals that we have there, to me, awareness campaigns should be frequent. These are the things that come out. Again, I would say daily if there's something to report. So if there's a 0 day that hits, you need some way to get an awareness out there that the 0 day has hit. People need to be aware. If not, then whatever works for your organization, you don't want to go for overload. But if you get out there and give them a weekly message, a monthly message, and like a newsletter type of thing, that keeps the awareness going. Training is separate in my mindset than the awareness. Awareness is just a constant reminder of things going on. Training gets you in there to let you practice and understand how to respond in case something from the awareness happens, and then you can respond to it. So hopefully that answered the question on that part.
Yeah, I think so. Next question here. What's the best way to communicate cyber breaches? Should it be to the whole company or a limited group?
So the best way to communicate to the whole company or a limited staff. So we don't want to sweep something under the rug if it's something that is going to be out in the wild. So if something's happened and it's a very public breach, obviously you need to get to your employees first to make sure everybody's well aware, they know what to say, and then we're talking about the communication plan is, employees need to know who can talk to the media or who can say what or who can post what on what social media site. So understanding that part is a pretty important part of this. If there is some kind of a breach that happens with your company, it happens to be with one customer, that customer may say you're not permitted to report this in the public. So you'll need to understand, kind of where things go. So there's not a single answer, the whole company or limited staff. It just depends upon the specific event. And anytime that there's an actual breach there, your lawyers need to be involved, and they can give you a little bit more instructions there. The cyber part of this, the cybersecurity, will tell you how things will happen there, but we need to make sure that we have our lawyers telling us who can talk to whom and what they need to say for those type of things.
All right, wonderful. Final question here we'll take. Who falls victim to cyber attacks?
Who falls victim? Anyone. If you have, and actually one of the things that I used to say to something similar to this is, if you have an online presence, then you can easily fall victim. But to be very specific on this one, I've got two quick examples on this. Is my father is 94. He recently lost his wallet. So I'm going through the process of making sure that everything's locked down and whatever, and I've got him there with, and he, again, 94, doesn't understand computers, he doesn't know what's going on, but as I'm getting into some of the sites to show him, where his information is, he says he's never been online, which he hasn't. And again, when he was in the workforce, there really wasn't computers, and he didn't have to worry about those. But when I would bring something up and show him that he is online, whether he's ever been out there or not, if he's got a bank account, he's got a social security number, he has a state ID, all of these things mean you have an online presence that are there. So again, just because he's never touched a computer doesn't mean that he can't fall victim to cyber attacks. And that's really worrisome because, like you say, there's no way that he would know unless he had family members to help him out to deal with this. Another pretty big example here, and I think we've all heard of those different phishing expeditions where somebody will say, I need you to go out and get this prepaid card and give me the numbers on the back of it. So that's a pretty big scam that's been going around here recently. Someone that I'm very familiar with that's a very intelligent person, they're in a very high-profile role, recently got a panic call from their husband and saying, hey, we've been called by our electric company. They're going to cut off our electricity if we don't pay this money by doing these steps. And they were going through the steps to get ready to do it. And finally, it was one of those things that, the light bulb went off. And they said, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. I know I've paid that bill. So it's things like anybody can fall victim, from someone who's totally innocent to someone who's very smart and knows what they're doing with this. So it behooves us all to be very well aware at all times, on our toes at all times, and just trying to make sure that we're as vigilant as we possibly can be, and continue reading and learning about the things that are going on.
Wonderful. Some great practical information shared here today, Cheryl. So any parting words here today?
I think I'm good with that there. Bob, thank you so very much for the opportunity. I love doing these presentations with you and to the folks that are joining. And I just think it's a great way to share and learn more from, the people who are coming to these meetings as well, because I do get messages back from them. So my email address is up there. OnSolve's website is up there. If you do want to communicate directly with me, by all means, please feel free to do so. Thank you again, Bob.
Wonderful. Thanks. Thanks again, everyone, for their attendance here today. We again hope you gather some great information from today's webinar. DRJ would also like to thank Cheryl for her time here today, as well as OnSolve for sponsoring today's webinar. We will be emailing everyone a link to the recording. You may view that recording as frequently as you wish or share it with your peers. If you have any additional questions, please contact Disaster Recovery Journal. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.